Hello. Hi. Happy Sunday. Can you guys see me and hear me? What's up? How's everyone doing? Hey, John. Hey, Tipsy. Hey, Unique Prepping. Thanks for being here. I saw Debbie pop in earlier too. Thanks, Debbie. We're back to Diddy today. Got a document. Thanks, John. I appreciate it. We have a document we're going to read, and it's the government's response to his new attempt at getting bail. Hey, Stephanie. Hi, good to see you guys. Thanks for being here. We're going to be reading the Diddy document. I know you guys have probably already seen it, heard about it. His team filed a 191-page new bail package. Honestly, I'm debating whether I want to read it on a live. It's not really anything new per se. But I do have the new document where they denied his request. So I'm going to read that live. I haven't read all of it, so we're doing this together. I skimmed it over very quickly, but that was about it. So let's get into it. Filed November 15th, 2024. Thanks for being here, Stephanie. Let me know if you guys can see it up on the screen. Let me go back up to the top. Bear with me. Happy Sunday, you guys. I hope you are having a great weekend. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. So filed November 15th. Here we go. Preliminary statement. The government respectfully submits its opposition to defendant Sean Combs' renewed motion for bail. The defendant's motion should be denied. As two judges have already concluded based on the evidence in the record, the defendant poses serious risk of danger and obstruction of these proceedings. In seeking a new hearing, the defendant rehashes the same arguments rejected by those two judges with claims of new evidence. But the defendant offers nothing new and material justifying a third bail hearing. In fact, the only truly quote-unquote new relevant evidence shows that the defendant has continued to engage in a relentless course of obstructive conduct designed to subvert the integrity of these proceedings. As described in detail below, while attempting to evade law enforcement monitoring, the defendant has, among other things, orchestrated social media campaigns that are, in his own words, aimed at tainting the jury pool, made efforts to publicly leak materials he views as helpful to this case, and contacted witnesses through third parties. For these reasons, the court should deny the defendant a new bail hearing. To the extent the court decides to reopen the bail hearing, however, the defendant's application for bail must still fall under the Bail Reform Act. His motion ignores the significant evidence presented by the government at prior hearings, showing that the defendant is a violent serial abuser who uses his vast wealth and position in the entertainment industry to conceal his illegal conduct and prevent victims of and witnesses to his abuse from coming forward. In light of the well-documented danger posed by the defendant, the updated proposed conditions of release are woefully insufficient to assure the safety of the community and the integrity of these proceedings. Indeed, the defendant's continued obstructive conduct confirms the conclusion reached by two other courts. No set of conditions meet that task. The defendant's request for temporary release should similarly be rejected. The defendant's confinement at the Metropolitan Detention Center, Brooklyn, affords him more than the adequate opportunity to prepare for trial, and his convenience does not provide a basis to reevaluate the danger to the community and the threat to the integrity of these proceedings that the defendant's release poses. Thanks, Tipsy. I appreciate you. John says the U.S. legal system seems to be very open with these things. In my opinion, Diddy won't make it to sentencing. He knows too much about others. That's a very likely, I could see that happening. I think Diddy's doing too much. I'm kind of glad he hasn't got bail. I feel he would, in my opinion. I'm not a lawyer. We're just here reviewing documents. I don't think it would be a good thing if he was out with all of these victims, although we don't know if those 120 plus victims are actually legitimate. He still is, owed his day in court to prove himself and whatnot. So, it is a cardinal principle of the justice system that he be presumed innocent, until proven otherwise. So I guess we'll have to see when he gets to trial, if and when that happens. Moving on. Background. The indictment and the defendant's arrest. Nearly a year-long investigation indictment was filed on September 12, 2024, charging the defendant in 3 counts: racketeering, conspiracy, sex trafficking, and interstate transportation to engage in prostitution in violation of Code 2421. As alleged in count 1, the defendant participated in a racketeering conspiracy since at least 2008. Specifically, as charged in the indictment, the defendant, often assisted by other members and associates of the racketeering enterprise, engaged in sex trafficking and acts of violence, including kidnapping, arson, physical violence, and other crimes. As the indictment alleges, from at least 2008 through 2024, the defendant used force, threats of force, and coercion to cause women to engage in activity, which included sex acts with male workers that the defendant referred to as freak-offs. Freak-offs, which sometimes lasted days, were elaborate sex performances that the defendant directed, blank during, and often recorded. The defendant ensured that the victims participated in freak-offs through coercion and violence, including by supplying female victims with controlled substances, subjecting female victims to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse, controlling victims' careers, livelihoods, and housing, and threatening to disseminate records of freak-offs. In condition with this conduct, count 2 charges the defendant with trafficking victim 1 by force, fraud, and coercion. And count 3 charges the defendant with causing the interstate transportation of others for the purpose of engaging in prostitution. The defendant was arrested on September 16, 2024. He was presented and arraigned in the following by Honorable Robin Tarnofsky, United States Magistrate Judge. I apologize if I'm saying that wrong. The defendant's remand. Following the defendant's arraignment on the indictment on September 17, 2024, the government moved for the defendant's detention under the Bail Reform Act. Because the defendant was charged with sex trafficking, detention is presumed under the Bail Reform Act. After hearing the argument, the judge found that the defendant has not rebutted the presumption in favor of detention, and there were no conditions that would reasonably assure the defendant's appearance or the safety of the community. Judge Tarnofsky emphasized the serious nature and circumstances of the charged conduct, which largely happened behind closed doors and was therefore difficult to monitor. The judge noted indications in 𝐂𝐚's history and characteristics that he would present a danger to the community and dismiss inadequate the exhortations from the defendant's counsel to trust him and his client, giving the defendant's drug abuse and anger issues. The judge highlighted that the weight of the evidence was significant given that multiple witnesses observed firsthand the defendant's violence and coercion. Hey, Clark. Good to see you, love. Thanks for being here. We're just reading through the new Diddy denied bail. I appreciate you being here. The defendant appealed the judge's decision to Judge Carter, to whom the case was then assigned, and a bail hearing before Judge Carter proceeded on September 18, 2024. After lengthy argument, Judge Carter denied the defendant bail, finding specifically that the government had proven that the defendant is a danger regarding obstruction of justice and witness tampering by clear and convincing evidence that the defendant is a danger to the safety of others and the community, more generally by clear and convincing evidence. Although Judge Carter did not rely on risk of flight, he noted that the bail package proposed by defense counsel was insufficient to address that risk. Ultimately, Judge Carter found that there was no condition or combination of conditions that would reasonably assure the safety of a person in the community, or that the defendant would not obstruct justice or tamper with the witnesses, and accordingly denied the defendant bail. The defendant was remanded to MDC, a Bureau of Prisons facility, where he remained in pretrial custody to the present. And then we're gonna argument. I'm gonna make sure I'm not reading Under the Bail Reform Act, the district court has discretion to reopen a bail hearing if information comes to light that is both new and material to the detention question. Specifically, a bail determination may be reopened before trial if the judicial officer finds that information exists that was not known to the movement at the time of the hearing and that has a material bearing on the issue, whether there are conditions of release that will reasonably assure the appearance of such person as required and the safety of any other person in the community. However, a bail hearing should not be reopened on the basis of information that was available to defendant at the time. Courts in the Second Circuit have found that new material and information purposes consist of something other than a defendant's own evaluation of his character or the strength of the case against him, truly changed circumstances, something unexpected, or a significant event. Moreover, because the Bail Reform Act states only that a hearing may be reopened if new and material information is presented, it leaves the decision to reopen a hearing to the sound of the discretion of the district court. Therefore, even if the defendant's arguments for reopening the hearing met the standard, which they do not, this court may still decide in its discretion to not reopen the hearing. Section 3142 provides that a court may permit the temporary release of the person in the custody of the United States Marshal or any other appropriate person to the extent that the judicial officer determines such release to be necessary for the preparation of the person's defense or another compelling reason. This provision has been used sparingly to permit a defendant's release where, for example, he is suffering from a terminal illness or serious injury. In considering whether release is necessary for preparation of the person's defense, the Bail Reform Act simply requires that a defendant in custody be afforded reasonable opportunity for private consultation with counsel. The defendant has the burden of showing the temporary release is necessary for preparation of the person's defense. Hey, Augie. Hi, love. Thanks for being here. Good to see you. We are reviewing Diddy's team filed another bail package, and it was like 191 pages. And girl, I was like, I don't see anything interesting. So we're now reading the response, and surprise, surprise, he is denied again. So we are just going through that document here. I appreciate you being here, Augie. Discussion. The court should reject the defendant's attempt to reopen the bail hearing based on the same information he presented to Judge Carter. The defendant's motion to reopen the bail hearing should be denied for the simple reason that he has not presented any information that was not known to him at the time of the bail hearing before Judge Carter. As set forth below, the defendant asserts that the court should consider new information relating to the defendant's relationship with victim 1 and his communications with various witnesses as a basis to reopen the bail hearing. But these allegedly new facts are the very same arguments made by defense counsel and rejected by the district court previously, dressed up with recently produced discovery. Because those facts are well known to the defendant before any discovery production, and because the defendant relied upon them in the prior hearing, he cannot recycle them here to revisit the sound determination made by Judge Carter that the defendant is a danger and risk to obstruction and must be detained. The defendant claims that communications between the defendant and victim 1, which were recently produced in discovery as part of the defendant's electronic devices and accounts, constitute new material. The defendant claims that the recently produced text messages reveal a loving, at times, toxic long-term relationship between two adults who decided to mutually break up. The claim is nothing new. Defense counsel made these exact points previously and even referred to the text messages and communications. At the September 17th, 2024 hearing, after noting that he had looked through more text messages and email than he cared to, the defense counsel observed, "This is a 10-year relationship. The sex trafficking is a 10-year relationship. These two people were in love. That will be made abundantly clear by the way they speak to each other, by the way the other witnesses describe their time together, and by the circumstances of how they broke up. They were in love, but Mr. Combs wasn't always faithful. At the end of the day, there was a mutual philandering, and victim number 1 ended up marrying the trainer that Mr. 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝑡𝐻 got for her and had 2 children that signaled the end of their relationship. There's nothing about the content of these text messages between the defendant and victim 1 that was not known to the defendant at the time of the initial hearing. We know he's talking about Cassie, right? 10-year relationship. Furthermore, in presenting recently produced text messages, the defendant cherry picks to paint a misleading picture, ignoring numerous other messages in the record between the defendant and victim 1, documenting the defendant's physical abuse of victim 1 and his threats to expose recordings of the freak-offs. Wow. Text message reading, "You know what sick and disgusting shit I was reminded of the other day? You forcing me or you were going to leak some freak off shit. I have a black eye and fat lip. You are sick for thinking it's okay to do what you've done, and I still have crazy bruising. I turned my head for a second and you get effed up and you drag me down the hall by my hair. I have bleeding cuts. You hit me in the head 2 good times. When you get effed up the wrong way, you always want to show me that you have the power and you knock me around. I'm not a rag doll. I'm someone's child." Moreover, despite attaching lengthy text messages between the defendant and victim 1 on various dates between August and November 2018, the defendant omits messages produced in the same thread about the defendant's violence. And then there's a whole sentence that's redacted. October 19th, 2018. So we know that this is a conversation between him and Cassie. Hey, chicken nugget. This case is complicated and deep. Yes. So there's a lot of moving parts to this case, especially if you've been following it since like the 90s. But we read all the legal documents here. I think I'm only short 2, which I'm deep diving into. But if you want to hear the previous lawsuits, etc., you can go back to my other previous lives. So I appreciate you, Chicken Nugget, for being here. Hi, Gala. Good to see you. Okay, let's continue. The defendant also rehashes his victims on victim 1 motives in bringing a civil lawsuit against the defendant, suggesting that victim 1 allegations against the defendant were merely attempts to obtain a financial windfall from Mr. 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝑡𝐻. Across multiple bail hearings in the instant brief, the defendant has made clear his litigation strategy is to personally attack victim 1, stooping to any depth to attempt to undermine her credibility. Wow, this is their response to denying the bond, and they're basically saying that he's trying to undermine Cassie. I have to sneeze, so if you see me, it disappears because I'm sneezing. Setting aside this questionable strategy, none of the information that purportedly undermines victim 1 motive was unknown to the defendant at the initial bail hearing. Again, defense counsel made all of these arguments previously, and these arguments have no bearing on the question of bail. The purpose of a bail motion is to determine whether there are conditions that will assure the safety of the community and the defendant's appearance in court, not to entertain the personal attacks on a statutory victim. To the extent the defendant takes issue with victim 1's credibility, a trial is the appropriate forum to address that. They're like, nope. The defendant next accuses the government of misleading the court as to the nature of certain of the defendant's communications with another victim, victim 2. The government did no such thing. The defendant's primary point of contention appears to be the government's characterization of the individual as a victim. In quibbling about how to label victim 2, an individual to whom the defendant continues to pay as a significant monthly sum, the defendant does not present any new information or grapple with the actual evidence. The messages and recordings between the defendant and victim 2, on which the government relied at the initial bail hearing, are clear on their face and consistent with the government's representations. The defendant was leveraging significant financial benefits to cause victim 2 to adopt his narrative of the relationship. Whether or not the defendant agrees with the characterization of victim 2 as a victim for purpose of the criminal case, the communications highlighted by the government indicate that a defendant used financial coercion to attempt to feed victim 2 a narrative that was consistent with his defense theory, a theory at odds with contemporaneous text messages sent by victim 2 to the defendant and others. The defendant just threatened me about my sex tapes, quote unquote, where I am heavily drugged and doing things he asked of me. Describing the victim 2 sexual trauma. In light of the defendant's continuing financial support of victim 2, it is not the government, but rather the defendant that is misleading the court. That is wild. Absolutely wild. The defendant's attempt to spin his contacts with witnesses, including witnesses served with grand jury subpoenas as evidence rebuting the government's proof of obstruction, fail in their entirety. For example, the defendant claims that the government misled the court and concealed the actual content of the communication between the defendant and a witness who was served with a grand jury subpoena in June of 2024. As an initial matter, the nature and substance of the defendant's communication with witness 1 was known to the defendant at the time of the initial hearing, but more importantly, these contacts, including the fact that the defendant evidently deleted the messages from his phone, confirm the government's proffer at the initial hearing and refute the statements made by defense counsel. Specifically, phone records show that between the end of 2022 and January of 2024, witness 1 occasionally contacted the defendant by phone without any response from the defendant. That changed in June of 2024. Witness 1 was served with a grand jury subpoena on June of 19th, 2024, and after contacting the government, was appointed counsel on June 25th, 2024. Beginning on June 26, 2024, only after witness 1 had been served with a grand jury subpoena and had counsel, the defendant initiated contact with witness 1, which the defendant attempted to obscure by initially calling witness 1's wife and later communicating with witness 1 over a VoIP service, including by text and a call lasting over several minutes. The following day, phone records indicate that witness 1 spoke with counsel for the defendant, even though witness 1 was represented by counsel. He and the defendant continued to directly exchange messages, and defense counsel also spoke directly with witness 1 again on July 8th, 2024. Following witness 1's testimony in the grand jury on July 25th, 2024, the defendant called and texted witness 1 again. So this is where they say he's like tampering with the witnesses. Diddy just won't stop. Can't stop, won't stop. Right? The defendant's repeated contact with witness 1, despite his apparent knowledge that the witness 1 was represented by counsel and had received a grand jury subpoena, undermines defense counsel previous denials of the defendant's interference in the government's grand jury investigation and shows that counsel cannot stop the defendant from contacting the grand jury witnesses. This concern is amplified by evidence indicating that the defendant appears to have deleted messages with witness 1, although the phone records confirm that the defendant, using a particular phone number, and witness 1 exchanged multiple text messages from June of 2024 through August of 2024, and there were no messages recovered from the defendant's cell phone associated with that number. Chicken Nugget says, Kim Porter would have been an important to this case. It's a shame. Yeah, I think they need to reopen that Kim Porter case. I'm actually going to be doing a deep dive on that here soon, but I agree, Chicken Nugget. I think they need to look into that. There's a few other people I think they need to look into too, related to Diddy and his group of friends, like Brittany Murphy, Aaliyah, Tupac, Kim Porter. Let's move on. Witness 2. The defendant also claims that the defendant's contacts in September 2024 with an individual represented by counsel who wanted to make a public witness statement were not in any way obstructive because the defendant and witness 2 were previously in frequent contact. However, the contact between the defendant and witness 2, who were bandmates, stopped in March of 2024. And from the timeline and the context of the defendant's contacts with witness 2, it is clear that when the defendant reinitiated contact with witness 2 in September of 2024, his purpose was to ensure that witness 2 was on his side and to pressure witness 2 to make a public statement denying allegations of violence by the defendant. So witness 2, we read that lawsuit here by making the band. Someone in making the band? That's what I'm assuming. The defendant reached out to witness 2 on September 11th, 2024, and sent her a copy of the lawsuit against the defendant, in which witness 2 names was mentioned several times. The defendant then called witness 2 and they spoke for nearly 6 minutes. After reading the lawsuit, witness 2 called the defendant back at his request and they spoke for over 4 minutes. Evidently, the defendant and witness 2 discussed witness 2 drafting a statement, as immediately after the call, the defendant told witness 2 in a text message, blank. So it's redacted. The defendant then asked witness 2 for her attorney's name. From September 11th, 2024 through September 15th, 2024, the defendant and witness 2 exchanged multiple texts and had multiple calls, at least 128 phone calls in total. Throughout these phone calls, the defendant repeatedly asked witness 2 when she planned to post her statement. So in 4 days, there was 128 phone contacts. And then there's a whole sentence that's redacted again. Witness 2 ultimately made a statement about the lawsuit via an Instagram post on September 13th, 2024. And then a whole sentence is redacted again. Then after the defendant was in custody, BOP investigators recovered the following notes from the defendant's cell during a pre-planned nationwide sweep of BOP facilities. So Diddy had cell phones. Are we surprised? No. Oh my gosh. I mean, he's a billionaire. Of course, he's going to have a cell phone in jail. I mean, I'm not surprised at all. And then there's like 2 whole sentences that are redacted again, as you can see on the screen. The strong interference to be drawn from the defendant's communications with witness 2 and his personal notes is that the defendant paid witness 2 after she posted her statement. From the timeline, the content, and the context of the communications between the defendant and witness 2, the defendant's clear goal was for witness 2 to draft and post a statement. Even after the defendant knew that witness 2 had counsel, he continued to reach out to her directly, a fact that clearly concerned Judge Carter, and rightfully so. That the defendant had multiple contacts with witness 2 up to including March 2024 changes nothing about the damning timeline and content of the calls in September of 2024. These communications are another example of the defendant using manipulation, influence, and power to persuade witnesses to support him. Hey, gas mask. Thanks for being here and stopping by. Exactly. Inmates always have cell phones. I agree to that 1000%. And now you can have tablets and like all kinds of crazy stuff, right? But yeah, there's always contraband, in my opinion. So I agree with you. He's just, I know, Augie, he just won't stop. It's like, damn, Diddy. He just won't stop. Based on the foregoing, the defendant has not demonstrated that he is entitled to reopen the bail hearing under 18, and the law cited by the defendant provides him no support otherwise. The defendant's reliance on the United States versus English is misleading. The citation by the defendant suggests that when cases are reassigned to new judges, the court should review the record de novo when considering bail motions. The Second Circuit's holding was not that broad. In English, the Second Circuit had held a district judge before whom a bail motion is properly made should consider the subsection factors and the determinations required by 3142. I'm going to skip some of this. Hold on. The defendant cannot rely on Section 3142 for his release. Alternatively, the defendant moves for pretrial release under Code 18, claiming that defendant cannot adequately prepare his defense at the MDC. The law does not support the defendant's release under this provision either, as the defendant has amply been afforded reasonable opportunity for private consultation with counsel at the MDC. First, the MDC has provided the defendant with more than reasonable accommodations to meet with counsel. The defendant is permitted to meet with counsel 7 days a week and regularly has access to a separate conference room off the common area of his unit. In fact, records indicate that the defendant has met with defense counsel most days since he has been in custody. So his lawyer's just there every day. So it's like he's not technically locked up all day, right? It is that he has no fear of consequence. The jail needs to monitor him better. I just feel like, in my opinion, it's all corrupt, right? He's a billionaire. Money pays. Records also indicate that the defendant frequently communicates with his attorneys by telephone and written communication, including, as explained below, through unauthorized means. But even if the defendant were only using authorized channels of communication, the MDC's procedures do not infringe on the defendant's constitutional right to effective counsel or to participate in his defense. It must be nice, huh, to be an inmate and have your lawyer just showing up every day. Those things are expensive. Those things. I'm like, those professions are expensive. My apologies. Not me getting in trouble up here. Let's see. Holding pretrial detention conditions, which include solitary confinement, restricted phone access, and a chair to review discovery, more comfortably were reasonably related to the defendant's specific security concerns and did not impersonally infringe the defendant's ability to prepare his own defense. So they're like, yeah, you have all the means capable to prepare for trial. I agree, corruption, right? Chicken nugget. Moving on. Second, defense's counsel proposes that the defendant must be released in order to prepare his defense is consistent with the Bail Reform Act, which contemplates that courts will weigh dangerousness and risk of flight against a defendant's opportunity to prepare for trial. In this case, the significant danger that the defendant poses weighed against the opportunities the MDC has provided the defendant to meet privately with his attorney clearly counsels in favor of the defendant's continued detention. Third, voluminous discovery alone is not a basis for release under either the Bail Reform Act or the Sixth Amendment. The defendant does not point to any case law suggesting that discovery of the kind produced in this case requires a defendant's release. The Bail Reform Act does not mandate the defense's release, even if review of discovery would be more convenient outside the MDC. Moreover, the aggressive trial schedule was specifically requested by the defendant. If he needs more time to review discovery, he can request an adjournment of the trial date. So they're basically like, listen, Diddy, you wanted to have a trial ASAP. You get it. And then you say that you're not being provided the means to prepare for trial because you're incarcerated, but everybody else does it that way. So like, can you just like shut up for like 1 second? Diddy? Anyways, moving on. Finally, the defendant's complaint about conditions at the MDC come as a surprise to the government, given the contrary public statements made by defense counsel and statements made by the defendant in monitored calls. Additionally, defense counsel has made no attempt to confer with the government about their concerns. Nonetheless, the government stands ready to engage with defense counsel on these issues if needed. He's like, special treatment for greasy twinkle toes, of course, right? That's funny. Moving on. The defendant poses a risk of obstruction, danger, and flight. For the reasons discussed above, the defendant has not met his burden of demonstrating that he is entitled to a hearing. Accordingly, the court need not make a determination regarding the defendant's risk of flight or dangerousness. However, even if the court were to analyze the factors, again, the court should continue the defendant's pretrial detention because no condition or combination of conditions can assure the defendant's appearance and the safety of the community, nor can conditions prevent the defendant's continued obstructive efforts. The incorporated submissions and arguments presented to Judge 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪 and Judge Carter amply support these findings, and as described further below, the argument for detention has only gotten stronger. No words. They're like, absolutely not. You not get bond. And just to let you know, your argument was not any more helpful. That's sad. As noted above, the evidence presented to Judge 𝗪𝗏𝗃, I apologize if I'm saying that incorrectly, and Judge Carter amply supported their findings that the defendant posed a risk of obstruction, justifying pre-trial detention, and would not be sufficient for the court to find the same. However, to the extent there were any doubt about the defendant's risk of obstruction at the time of the prior bail hearings, such doubt is now non-existent. Since the defendant has been detained at MDC, he has continued to try to evade law enforcement monitoring, corrupt influence witness testimony, and further attack the integrity of these proceedings. Specifically, while in custody at the MDC, the defendant has repeatedly communicated with others in ways that violate BOP rules and are designed to evade BOP and law enforcement monitoring, including as described below, using PAC numbers belonging to other inmates to make calls, using three-way calls to contact other individuals, including individuals who are not on his approved contact list, and using an unauthorized third-party communication system to send messages to numerous individuals, including unauthorized contacts. Not him using another inmate's number. Other inmates' PAC numbers. The government has reviewed dozens of recordings of the BOP jail calls in which the defendant uses telephone accounts of at least 8 other inmates. 8. He'd been using their minutes and calling and doing all kinds of crazy things, which is against BOP regulations. Seemingly to avoid law enforcement monitoring, the defendant uses other inmates' PAC numbers to make phone calls to both individuals on the defendant's approved contact list, as well as other individuals who are not approved the contact list. I don't understand. Seemingly to avoid law enforcement monitoring. Well, they are all monitored, right? It's a federal prison, so I don't understand what they mean by, is he being monitored extra just because he's a celebrity? If so, that's not right. But I mean, they're all monitored, all jail calls and prison calls. So yeah, he's calling people that are not on his list. So put him on the list, right? Unless there's someone he doesn't need to be talking to or doesn't want people to know that he's talking to. To obtain or maintain access to other inmates' PAC numbers, the defendant directs others to pay the inmates, including through payment processing apps and BOP commissary account deposits. The defendant knows this is against BOP regulations. At the outset of each phone call, the inmate is prompted to enter his PAC number, after which an automated recording announces, quote unquote, sharing of PAC numbers is against BOP policy and is subject to disciplinary action. Hey, David. Good to see you. Thanks. No, you're fine. You need to say sorry. We're just reading the government denying Diddy once again. So we're just reading that document. But I appreciate you being here. Chicken Nugget says they smuggle in cell phones that aren't monitored. It's because he's a high-profile case and they're always going to be listening. But I thought they always listened, right? They're all recorded calls in jail or prison. Three-way calling. Not the three-way calling. I used to three-way call all the time. The defendant has also frequently instructs individuals whom he contacts by telephone, including family members and his attorneys, to add other individuals via three-way call. The practice is not authorized by BOP as it helps to conceal the identities of the contacted individuals. The government has also reviewed multiple calls in which the defendant has instructed others to dial in third parties, including members and associates of the enterprise and individuals who are not on the defendant's contact list. In addition to flouting BOP rules regarding cell phone use, The defendant also uses a non-authorized third-party messaging service called Contact Me ASAP to obscure his communications. The defendant appears to be using two Contact Me ASAP accounts. First, the defendant's BOP contact list includes a particular email address, email 1, assigned to the defendant's son, which does not appear to be an owned account by the defendant's son, but instead appears to be an email connected to Contact Me. Hold on, let me read that again. First, the defendant's BOP contact list includes a particular email assigned to the defendant's son, which does not appear to be owned by the defendant's son. Which son? Second, the defendant appears to be using other inmates' Contact Me ASAP account, primarily using email 1. The defendant has exchanged hundreds of text messages via Contact Me ASAP with dozens of individuals, including attorneys and individuals who are not on the defendant's contact list. The defendant's repeated circumvention of BOP regulations starting almost immediately after arriving at MDC speaks volumes and his ability to comply with any conditions of release. They're like, you can't behave here. Why would we let you out? David says, uses other inmates that are low profile that most likely are not going to be listening. Oh, I see. Hey, Tony, good to see you. Happy Sunday. Thanks for being here. No, I totally got what you mean. Even more concerning, however, is the defendant's use of these unauthorized methods of communication to his efforts to obstruct and subvert the criminal proceeding. The defendant's intentions are reflected in his own words on BOP calls with a network of family members and associates whom the defendant has tasked with executing his will. On multiple calls, often using the PAC numbers of other inmates, the defendant is explicit about his intention to use public statements to alter public perception and redacted. The defendant leaves no doubt that the narrative he wants to redacted is a potential jury pool's perception of this criminal proceeding. Why is it redacted? It's so annoying. It's like, just file these legal documents like they're supposed to be filed. So who is it? Who are they talking about here? In multiple calls, often using the PAC numbers of other inmates, defendant is explicit about his intention to use public statements to alter perception and blank. The defendant leaves no doubt that the narrative he wants to blank is a potential jury pool's perception of this criminal proceeding. Examples of the efforts are plentiful. And then there's like 3 sentences that are redacted. Notably, the defendant continued these efforts after the court's October 25th, 2024, requested by the defense prohibiting exactly the sort of conduct. After the court entered the order, the defendant enlisted family members to plan and execute a social media campaign around the defendant's birthday with the intention of influencing the potential jury in the criminal proceeding. At the defendant's carefully curated direction, the defendant's children posted a video to their respective social media accounts showing the defendants gathered to celebrate the defendant's birthday. The defendant then monitored the analytics, audience engagement, and explicitly discussed with his family how to ensure that the video had his desired effect on potential jury members in the case. So that whole video that we saw was actually just made up. It was intentional from what they're claiming here. So they must have proof over calls and stuff, right? Which we knew. Now his son is running his Instagram account. So then there's a whole section that's redacted on the next page again. Wait, I think I just went too far. Besides flagrantly violating the court's October 25th, 2024 order prohibiting this kind of interference with a fair trial, the defendant's own words make clear that his intent is to improperly influence the jury pool in the criminal proceeding. The defendant does not stop there. During other calls, the defendant makes clear his intention to anonymously publish information that he thinks will help his defense case. And then there's a whole paragraph that's redacted. That pic was silly and staged. I know. I knew that was a setup. I mean, I feel bad for his kids. Well, mainly his girls, but the defendant's efforts to anonymously leak videos favorable to his defense in this case show that he's using his so-called public relations strategy to influence this criminal case. John says, I am amazed at how open the U.S. legal system is. Me too. David says, I'm kind of sad because I found out that me and Diddy have the same birthday. Yeah. The defendant's effort to obstruct the integrity of this proceeding also includes relentless efforts to contact potential witnesses, including victims of his abuse, who could provide powerful testimony against him. For example, on October 4th, 2024, in a call involving the defendant and one of his adult sons, the defendant says, redacted. And then there's way more redaction, and then there's a whole block of redaction. Why so much redaction if you don't want us to know, but you claim you want us to know? This provides clear inference that the defendant's goal is to blackmail victims and witnesses either into silence or providing testimony helpful to his defense. So I'm assuming the redacted part is where he's telling one of his sons, talking about one of the victims, and blackmailing one of them, which they don't want to release because that victim's probably not going to come forward with their name until trial, in my opinion. Hey, AZ. I hope you're doing well. Thanks for stopping by. The defendant is a danger to others. In addition to failing to meaningfully contend with his ongoing risk of obstruction the defendant poses, he also spends no time addressing the significant acts of violence, physical violence that the government highlighted at the initial hearing, which led Judge Carter to conclude that the defendant is a danger to the safety of others and the community more generally by and clear and convincing evidence. Indeed, as a record before this court makes clear, the defendant's long history of violence demonstrates his dangerousness. Moreover, contrary to the defendant's claim that the evidence is quote unquote thin, evidence supporting the defendant's long history of abuse, including witness testimony, communications, photos, videos, police reports, and other materials, demonstrates that the strength of the government's case against the defendant, a factor considered by the court. As charged in the indictment, the defendant has engaged in physical, sexual, and emotional abuse of his romantic partner for years. The defendant also engaged in acts of violence directed towards his employees and many others, including kidnapping, arson, and physical violence, such as throwing objects at people, throwing people to the ground, and hitting, kicking, dragging, and choking, stomping, and shoving others. Multiple witnesses, including the defendant's employees and others, observed or experienced the defendant's violence firsthand. The defendant's acts of violence showed there's no condition or combination of conditions that will adequately safeguard others in the community. The danger, I think, is quite serious. There have been weapons around. There has been significant violence, and I also think it's significant that there has, I think, been a proffer of significant evidence of coercion of witnesses. I also find that the government has proven that the defendant is a danger to the safety of others in the community more generally by clear and convincing evidence. While far from the only example, the video of March 2016 incident at the Intercontinental Hotel discussed at length in both previous hearings, puts the defendant's dangerousness on full display. Yeah. The video of him brutally dragging and beating Cassie. Absolutely. Although defense counsel conceded that the incident was relevant to Judge Carter's determination of dangerousness, the defendant fails to address it with respect to the present motion. Instead, he repeats his prior characterization of the defendant's relationship with victim one as complex and at times toxic, and pivots to the defendant's philanthropic endeavors and family relationships in an effort to distract. But the defendant's personal relationship and charity work does not neutralize or erase the video evidence showing the defendant punching a female victim, dragging her, throwing a vase at her, and kicking her. So we know this is about Cassie, clearly. In sum, the defendant cannot walk away from clear record in this case. His inability to explain away his long history of violence, including the March 2016 incident captured on film, is a fatal blow to his application for release. The defendant's extensive history of violence makes him a danger to those around him, and safety of the community cannot be ensured short of his continued detention. The defendant has not rebutted the presumption that there are no conditions to assure his future appearance, given the fact that the defendant faces a mandatory minimum sentence of 15 years of imprisonment and a statutory maximum sentence of life imprisonment. In this case, the defendant has an incentive to flee, given the potential punishment and the nature of the evidence that will be presented at trial, and has nearly limitless resources to facilitate his flight. While counsel took steps to mitigate the defendant's substantial risk of flight before the indictment, the defendant's incentives have changed materially now that he faces the very real possibility of a substantial term of incarceration. The defendant's new proposed bail package is insufficient. Oh, sorry, I went ahead of one page on your screen. In the face of the significant evidence that the defendant poses a risk of obstruction, a danger to the community, and a risk of non-appearance, the defendant's proposed updated bail package is woefully insufficient. As discussed, 𝗟𝗏, the defendant has shown repeatedly, even while in custody, that he will flagrantly and repeatedly flout rules in order to improperly impact the outcome of this case. The defendant has shown, in other words, that he cannot be trusted to abide by rules or conditions. While the proposed conditions suggest the defendant will have no access to telephones or internet except for calls with counsel, this is insufficient to ensure the defendant will cease engaging in unauthorized or inappropriate communications through third parties. They're like, he can't behave while being incarcerated. Why should we let him out? Well, I don't blame them. The defendant is already doing that just against BOP regulations. If the defendant cannot abide by the rules in the highly restrictive setting at MDC, there is no reason he should be trusted to abide by the court's conditions in a less restrictive setting. Furthermore, the defendant's proposal to restrict visitors to select family members is also insufficient. Since being in custody, the defendant has deployed family members to carry out obstructive conduct on his behalf. As evidenced in jail calls, the defendant asked family members to reach out to potential victims and witnesses, create narratives to influence the jury pool, and pursue marketing strategies to sway public opinion. The defendant's emphasis on 24/7 private security is also problematic. The defendant has demonstrated an uncanny ability to get others to do his bidding, employees, family members, and MDC inmates alike. There is no reason to believe that private security personnel would be immune. At any rate, the defendant's private jail proposal at best elaborately replicates a detention facility without the confidence of security such a facility instills. Moreover, the Second Circuit has expressly decried attempts like the defendant's to pay his way out of detention. The defendant's updated proposal simply does not alleviate the risk of danger, obstruction, and flight, particularly in light of the defendant's inability to comply with BOP regulations and his efforts to engage in obstructive conduct while subject to monitoring at the MDC. For the reasons set forth, the defendant's renewed motion for bail shall be denied. New York, November 15th, 2024. So yeah, he was denied. We're not surprised. Thanks for stopping by, David. I appreciate you. Okay, so we did it. We read through that document in about an hour, 30 pages, the bond being denied. I appreciate you guys for being here. I will be back later with another live, true crime related, not Diddy related. I think, in my opinion, if you want to know, Diddy should continue to be incarcerated. Augie says, I really need to find all the evidence on him ASAP and charge him accordingly for everything. I know, I agree. I think we need to know who all the victims are and celebrities. We just need to see trial, but then it's federal, so we probably won't be able to watch that. I don't know. I just hope they don't mess up the case by some technicality, right? I appreciate you guys for being here, and I will hope to see you on the next live covering some more true crime. Happy Sunday, and make sure you hit that like button on your way out.